welcome to another Friday night. If you followed our channel for any period of time, you realize that one of the things that's really necessary in understanding complex trauma properly is to begin to understand the role of narcissism, both in creating complex trauma, and then complex trauma leads potentially to narcissism. And so we've done several talks on narcissism and really described the different characteristics, the different types, and so you can go and look at all of that if you're interested. What I would like to do today is answer a question, that is, why is it that in the West especially, but in many countries, narcissists are welcomed as leaders? Why is it that people don't see kind of how destructive they can be and just welcome them with open arms as their savior? And so I want to talk about narcissism and leadership this week and next. So before I dig into that, I want to just say a couple things up front that I hope will just kind of lay the foundation of really understanding this topic. Eleanor Greenberg has written, nobody is a borderline, nobody is a narcissist, nobody is a schizoid. So what she's saying is, often in our culture today, oh, they're a narcissist. And it's a stigmatized name that we pigeonhole people with. And she goes, whoa, nobody's a narcissist. Nobody's born a narcissist. We might diagnose somebody as narcissistic personality disorder, but what does that mean? And so what she says is this: when we diagnose, we're describing a pattern, a particular gestalt, never a person. All people are unique. Labels, however well-intended, cannot do justice to human complexity. And I would agree with her. So what we're really wanting people to understand is people aren't born a narcissist. It's dangerous to just pigeonhole people and brand them as narcissists. We need to understand that narcissism is a pattern of behavior that has developed in order to protect a deep wound, and it's the outworking of trauma and shame. And so the person develops this way of coping, this way of trying to get their needs met, this way of trying to compensate for their shame, but it's patterns of behavior that if you just focus on them, you miss the real issue, which is the deep wound, the deep shame that drives all of that. So just to develop that, let me just take you back to the original story that led to the term narcissism. And so it comes out of Greek mythology, the myth of Narcissus. And so Narcissus is a young man that finds himself thirsty one day, and so he goes to a pool. And as he bends down to get a drink, the pool is perfectly calm, and so he sees his reflection in the pool. And the image is so striking, he's just captivated by his own beauty that he reaches in to embrace himself. But in doing so, he disrupts the water, and so all of a sudden the image is lost. And so he waits till the water calms down again, and then he sees his beauty again, and he reaches in to embrace it, and then disrupts the water. And so what begins to happen is he's desperate to see himself, but he can't embrace it, so he just is immobilized. He sits there and just stares at his reflection all day, and as a result of that, he's not meeting any of his other needs. He's neglecting his basic needs because he spends all day staring at himself, absorbed in his own beauty. And so what has come out of that is really defining narcissism as a person who's totally in love with themselves, preoccupied with their own beauty, their own image, how they look. And so they need the reflection. They need mirrors, or they're called echoes, to reflect back to them. That's people in their life who tell them how wonderful they are, how much they appreciate them, who validate them constantly. They need that. That's the pattern that develops. So get people in your life who will reflect back to you your greatness, because you need that constant mirrored back to you that you're wonderful, that you're admired. So that's basically narcissism. So it's all about image, it's all about being admired, it's all about power, prestige, control. But if we stop there and then we just brand people, they're a narcissist, we miss what's really going on underneath. What is driving this? So let me just read you a couple quotes and then kind of expand and explain it. Terence Real has said this: people often think of narcissism as the symbol of excessive self-regard, but in fact, he exemplifies the opposite. As the Renaissance philosopher Marsilio Ficino observed in the 1500s, narcissists did not suffer from an overabundance of self-love, but rather from its deficiency. The myth is a parable about paralysis. The youth who first appears in restless motion is suddenly rooted to one spot, unable to leave the elusive spirit. He would let no one touch his heart. This is the wound of shame. One who has deep shame cannot connect and cannot become vulnerable. He is immovable and untouchable. So what they're recognizing right up front is that narcissism, the person's not able to love themselves, that's shame, and therefore, because of that, they're not able to be vulnerable to others, they're not able to connect with others because they can't be authentic, and so they become this frozen person seeking to somehow meet their needs but never able to connect with others. Ficino goes on to say this: if Narcissus had possessed real self-love, he would have been able to leave his fascination. The curse of Narcissus is immobilization, not out of love for himself, but out of dependency upon his image. Narcissus is trapped in a vicious, narcissistic feedback loop. He's immobilized from ever growing, from ever really getting his needs met, by being captivated or in this feedback loop where he needs others to try to feed his soul, others to try to meet his needs, others to admire him, and it causes him to be immobilized. He stops growing. The name Narcissus comes from the Greek narc, which means numbness. So we get narcotics. It's a kind of a stupor. It is the sting of addiction that Narcissus experiences. Healthy self-love would have motivated him to befriend every wounded and weary part of himself. It would have motivated him to tend to his trauma and his deep wounds in his soul. But self-contempt motivated him to search in vain for what he thought he needed to live, only to die from a neglect of what he really needed. In other words, the narcissist is so deeply wounded, but he thinks he finds a solution that's going to fix him, but he becomes addicted to the solution. It seems to work, but it doesn't. It operates like addiction, but he keeps chasing it, looking for the next high of making himself feel better for a moment, but he's not meeting his real needs. He's neglecting what he really needs, the real solution, but he's developing a pattern. And that pattern then gets branded as narcissism. So narcissism is not fundamentally about self-love, but about an escape from love. The fragile little boy goes into hiding, and the protective false self takes the lead. So let me read what John Bradshaw writes. And John Bradshaw has written extensively about shame issues, and we've talked about him in the past. But he says this: because the exposure of self to self lies at the heart of neurotic shame. So shame basically is I don't like myself, so now I abandon myself. I don't even want to live with myself. I don't want to face myself. So I can't be exposed to myself. I'm hiding from myself. So that's at the heart of neurotic shame. The escape from the self becomes necessary. So it's all about escaping who I think I am. The escape from self is accomplished by creating a false self. The false self is always more or less than human. So the false self may be a perfectionist, superhuman, or a slob, less than human. A family hero, superhuman, or A family scapegoat, don't care about anything, anybody. As the false self is formed, the authentic self goes into hiding. Years later, the layers of defense and pretense are so intense that one loses all conscious awareness of who one really is. But the false self isn't an adult. It's a child, stuck in adolescence, perpetually replaying outdated ways of getting its needs met in its present adult body. Like Narcissus, it looks and looks only to become more isolated, more turned in on itself. It may love the image it has created, but it has no real capacity to love itself. So well said. Chuck DeGroat has written this: while diagnostic definitions are helpful, they do not reveal the mammoth iceberg of shame that hides beneath the surface and that drives narcissistic behavior. So it's all about this deep, intense shame. Indeed, it's only when we see below the waterline that we begin to understand and have empathy for our narcissist. Shame drives narcissism. And I fully agree. Then he defines shame this way. Shame is fundamentally about an internal disconnection. So I'm hiding from myself. I don't like myself. But it arises from our childhoods. That leads to a relational disconnection in the present. So now I'm not only hiding from myself and disconnected from myself, I'm afraid that if others see me, they will reject me. If others see the true me, they will reject me. So now there's a disconnect in all my relationships. I can't be authentic and I don't want to connect. I want to, but I'm afraid to. In an absence of true intimacy, we search for a substitute. So it's the true connection and intimacy that feeds the soul, meets the needs, but we're afraid of that, so we look for a substitute. We use and manipulate people instead of loving them. We use food, sex, substances, even spirituality in a search for the inner completion we long for. So as we use all of these other things, that's when we develop the patterns, and those are the addictions that we begin to try to repeatedly feed our soul. Few know that this is the inner drama of the one who suffers from narcissism. Few can empathize with their desperate need to connect with something, anything, when they bite and wound other people all the time. We don't realize how much pain and emptiness is deep inside of them. So let me just say this. All of us are prone to narcissistic tendencies. When we are out of touch with our shame, when we are out of touch of our own limitations and we don't accept our own limitations, when we are unaware of some of the deep questions and fears and pain and insecurity inside of us. If we're out of touch with that, if that's just operating in our subconscious templates, and then that gets touched or triggered, then we explode into our limbic brain and we go into narcissistic tendencies. And that's when we do all kinds of damage to ourselves, to others, and we leave the debris field of pain, broken relationships, and shattered dreams. So my whole point is helping us to become aware of the deep shame, fears that drive these templates, that drive these patterns, and that for some people, those are very narcissistic. I want to bring that to our conscious level so we can heal the shame, so that we can deal with the deep wounds and trauma. Let me give you one other piece here in the book. Late in the Culture of Narcissism, Lash defines narcissism as the longing to be freed from longing. In other words, you don't want all of those unpleasant emotions. You don't want all of those unpleasant desires that aren't truly being fulfilled. And so you long to be freed from that painful emotional world, those deep longings that can't be satisfied. So in other words, the narcissist cannot tolerate the limitations of his humanity. They refuse to accept the limitations of being human. They want to be superhuman. And so for them it is shut down conscience, shut down weak emotions. That they think makes them stronger. It makes them superhuman, when actually it makes them less human. It makes them weaker. But in their mind, it makes them stronger because they can succeed in certain arenas. And so narcissism is all about not accepting being human, wanting to be freed from the limitations of being human, and trying to create a superhuman persona. So hopefully what you can see right up front is, if we're going to help a narcissist, we have to heal the wounded part of them, deep inside of them. That's the only way to truly heal a narcissist. So the little boy or girl within is wounded. They've created this well-crafted false self that's very narcissistic, that's designed to protect that wounded part of them. They're not going to give that up unless they can heal that wounded part of them. And that's really what we're about at Lift and React. So I hope you can then see why narcissists are attracted to leadership. Because leadership provides them with a solution to what seems to be the solution to their shame. So all of a sudden now, they have status, they have respect, they have power, they have prestige, and they've got all these mirrors under them that they're leading, who are talking back to them and reflecting back to them, you're wonderful, you're a great leader. So leadership becomes the perfect solution in their minds for that deep wound, for that deep shame. It gives them everything that they think is going to solve shame: prestige, validation, power, control, and lots of mirrors. And so the power keeps all of that insecurity and fear at bay. As long as they feel in power, they don't feel hopeless, they don't feel powerless, they don't feel helpless. But they're unable to have intimate relationships. And so how do they compensate for that emptiness and not having that? If I'm in control of everything. Then I can control people. I can look like I'm having relationships where I'm not going to get wounded, where I don't have to have too much vulnerability or emptiness. So I need control. I need power. Those are going to help with some of those deep longings and fears. Very interesting that former CIA profiler and psychologist Gerald Post has written extensively on narcissism, including books on Donald Trump and Bill Clinton. And he describes narcissists as mirror hungry, using their audiences and followers as a mirror to reflect back praise and admiration. The narcissistic leader's hidden shame and pervasive sense of emptiness is alleviated, perhaps only for a little while, by the applause of the adoring crowd or the affection of a devoted follower. And so what I want you to see is narcissists are drawn or attracted to leadership positions. They want that. It appeals to them. But what are they like as leaders? So Diane Lamberg, who's done extensive work around narcissists and abuse, especially within organizations, has written this: the mantra of a narcissistic leader is, I am bigger, I am better, and I have no interest in understanding my impact on you except insofar as you can feed my ego. So I don't really care about you. I say I do. I only care about you if you reflect back to me how great I am. So a narcissist has many gifts except for the gift of humility. And that becomes what destroys his effectiveness. So one way to look at a healthy leader has always been a shepherd. They lead their sheep, but they take care of the needs of the sheep. Sheep are helpless to provide for themselves well. And so a healthy leader is responsible for others, has authority over others, but he loves them. He cares selflessly for them. He sacrifices for them. And so what then became known as false leaders were wolves in sheep clothing. So they dress up to look like a shepherd, but they're out to devour the sheep. They're really wolves. And so here's what Diane Langberg said. Instead of taking care of the flock, the narcissistic leader tends only to himself. They're wolf in sheep's clothing. He profits from the flock. Failing to offer self-sacrificial love, he shows no care or empathy. The flock is only there to be used to benefit himself. Then she says this, I don't think we really understand the level of deception that occurs in narcissists who abuse. We think that if they cry and say they are sorry, that's a good thing. But it doesn't touch the practice of deception that runs their lives and that runs their organizations. So narcissists, basically what she's saying, live by lies. They tell lies, they believe lies. Everything's about deception. Nothing's about authenticity or truth. And we minimize the damage it does. We minimize that it's a big deal. But man, it destroys stuff. So we're very naive about all of this. You can't marinate yourself in the lies and deceptions that are needed to keep abusing and then say, I'm sorry, and have that change who you are. And so basically she's saying we're partly responsible for allowing narcissists who are all about lies to continue just because they say sorry every time they do something wrong and not require a deeper look at change inside of them. Henry Nouwen has written, history is the history of people tempted to choose power over love, wolves in sheep's clothing over a true shepherd, control over sacrifice, being a leader over being led. One thing is clear to me, the temptation of power is greatest when intimacy is a threat, or when intimacy is lacking, or the ability to have intimacy is lacking in a person's life. Much leadership is occupied by people who do not know how to develop healthy, intimate relationships and have opted for power and control instead. Profound. Many empire builders have been people unable to give and receive love. So true. So that leads us to why then do organizations welcome narcissists to be their leaders? Why are they drawn to narcissistic leaders? So you have to understand that there's actually two narcissistic systems at work. So there's the system within the narcissist himself. Their template, their patterns is they need mirrors. They need people in their life to reflect back to them how great they are. But then there's the second narcissistic system, and that's within all of the organization, the people of the organization. And so this is known as collective narcissism. They need somebody who's a narcissist so that they feel better about themselves. And so there's two narcissistic systems that are feeding each other. Now, when we look at collective narcissism, there's two types of collective narcissism. So number one is the grandiose narcissistic system. So this is the group of people who are impressed. We are the best. We are the greatest. And so they need a narcissistic leader who comes along and says, we're going to be the best. We're going to be better than everybody else. And you guys are the greatest. And they tell them, and that leader tells them all of that. And that leader enables them to succeed. That leader enables them to be better than everybody else. But it's all about we have to be the best. We have to be special. We have to be great. We have to be better than everybody else. So it's their shame that's feeding that. And so they need to compensate for their shame by collectively being a group that's better than everybody else. But then there's a subtle, almost looks non-narcissistic, but it's called vulnerable narcissistic systems. And what that is it comes across as very shy, almost ashamed of who they are, very almost like victims, needy, down on themselves. And you go, how can that be narcissistic? But this is the subtle part. They adore how humble they are. They adore how righteous they are. They adore how sacrificing they are. They take pride in how they put themselves down, how they don't have great prestige, how they don't have great affluence. They're all about taking pride in being so small. And so that's a second type of collective narcissism. And they both can go together. They both can, one group can have pieces of both, but you need a narcissistic leader. And so again, you have the narcissistic leader, and these two systems are really those of co-narcissists. And so the narcissistic leader is going to come in and he's going to help them become great. The other, the narcissistic leader comes in and he's responsive to how kind of low they feel about themselves and makes them feel better about themselves, but then really cements to them that, yeah, you guys are more righteous than everybody else. Your humility is far beyond everybody else's. So your greatness is how small you are. So the same issues, it's shame trying to find a solution. And so what I want you to see is that in collective narcissism, it's not just the narcissistic leader that has narcissistic patterns and tendencies and deep shame issues. It's the people as well. They also have deep shame issues. And they're trying to get their shame needs met in a system, in a group, by becoming the greatest or by becoming proud about how small they are. That is still shame. And so what I want you to understand is a narcissistic leader is only able to get in a position of leadership if there's a group of people who also have deep shame issues, who function as a co-narcissist. They need a narcissist and the narcissist needs them. That's how it works. Now, what concerns me is that the more a culture is influenced by complex trauma, so the more people in a culture that have complex trauma, especially the more severe type, guess what you're going to have? More people with shame, more people with deep shame, more people who want a narcissistic leader. And so cultures that basically become shame cultures, cultures that get more and more complex trauma as it gets more unhealthy, become more vulnerable to getting narcissistic leaders, which then creates even more trauma and sets up a vicious cycle that only makes things worse. So what then are the causes of this collective narcissism? So we talked about this deep shame that people have, and their solution in their mind is to become great as a group, and they need a leader to help them do that, or that they're part of something special. So this group is better than everybody else. I want to join it. That's going to make me feel special. And then they keep the narcissistic leader once he becomes abusive, once his true colors become shown, because all of that shame has also created codependency. They're people pleasers. They can't stand up for themselves. They avoid conflict. And so they let a whole bunch of unhealthy dynamics continue because of that codependency. Another piece for many of them is that good narcissistic leaders groom their people. They say all the nice things. They build trust. They look great. And it's like grooming somebody to sexually abuse them, but you groom them to let them abuse you and take advantage of you in different ways. And so there's always a grooming aspect to it. But then there's another piece to it, and that is for most people that end up in organizations where they have a narcissistic leader, they had a narcissist in their life in early childhood. Usually one of their parents or somebody very influential in their life was a narcissist. And so that was their normal. That they've learned how to relate to a narcissist that feels right to be in a relationship with a narcissist. They know what to do. And so they're naturally drawn into their comfort level, which is relationship with a narcissist. But there's another piece that's so important to understand of how this dynamic works. often organizations with lots of shame that take a narcissistic leader, there's always a fear element. And what a good narcissistic leader will do is create even more fear. And they'll say, the world's a terrible place. This is all bad stuff is going to happen. We need to band together. We need to kind of entrench ourselves and build a castle around us and get ready to fight the enemy, and I'll lead you. And so there's always a fear element that the narcissist takes advantage of. Another thing is, as you look at a lot of these organizations that take narcissistic leaders, many of them still have some very bad teaching as part of the dynamics of how that organization runs. There's still kind of a patriarchy, a hierarchy. It's all about rules and submission to rules. You never challenge authority. You respect authority, which is very distorted and used to allow all kinds of unhealthy stuff to happen. And so there's usually a system of behavior, practice, belief, rules that enables this to continue, that makes it a systemic thing. And then the final piece that makes people susceptible to this is that they measure success by the wrong standard. And so in their mind, success is you get big, you get lots of money, you are prestigious. They don't look at what's the person's private life like, what's the person's relationships like, what's the person's shame like, what's the person's attitudes like. They just look at externals as the measure of success, not internals, not relational. And so if that's what guides them, then narcissists can check off all the boxes because they can be very successful and they can do all the right external actions and get accepted. I read a couple years ago a fascinating book by C.D. Baker called The Seduction of Eva Volk. And it's a fascinating novel about a Christian family in Germany pre-World War II. And so back in Germany pre-World War II, they're desperately seeking hope and healing, along with their whole culture after the First World War, where they were left feeling humiliated, they were left in extreme poverty. Life was very hard. And so Hitler comes along and he seduces everybody into believing we can make Germany great again. We can have wealth again. I will lead you to that. And so people bought into Hitler as being their savior. He was going to be the best thing for Germany. He will return honor to Germans who felt shamed after the loss of World War I. He will feed the hungry. He will assist the poor. He will lift the despair. And it looked like it worked for a while. Hitler seemed to pull it off. He put bread back on the shelves, money in their pockets, gave them pride in their nationality again. But the seduction and the blindness that they had to what was really going on with Hitler cost them dearly. So C.D. Baker writes this: Eva's world was broken and fearful, and so was she. Then a Savior came as an angel of light. So Eva and her world closed their eyes and let him have his way. And so that's why people are drawn to narcissistic leaders. So you can see there the shame, the fear, and Hitler took advantage of that. And it cost them dearly. So back to Gerald Post. He says this: those drawn to narcissistic leaders are ideal hungry people who so long for the ideal image of strength in another that they can't see or perhaps ignore the leader's shadow side or their dark side, including the debris field of damage he causes. For many who see themselves as weak or incomplete, that's shame, a powerful other can serve as a needed battery source. So let me take that a little bit further, because for most groups, if you were to ask them why they would pick a narcissistic leader, they're not going to give you the reasons I gave you. They're not going to say fear, shame, codependency, bad thinking and beliefs about how an organization should run. They're going to point to really kind of two things. Number one, the leader gives us results. And number two, The leader checks all the boxes for being successful, and they appear so healthy, and on the external, their image is impeccable. They seem like a wonderful person. They're able to be so good with people, so sociable. And basically, they're saying, this could be a con artist who acts wonderful, and we're buying their act. But that's what they're really focusing on, is this person is giving us results. So again, let me read you a quote around that. Organizations are drawn to narcissistic leaders because they are attractive to us. Narcissistic leaders have a presence. They are exciting. They hold out the promise of great things for the organization. Many produce impressive results, at least for a while. Those who see through the hype recognize it as pretentiousness, but for those who are hoping for a messianic leader, narcissistic style can be very appealing. These organizations are willing to tolerate the abuse in hope that the leader will lead them into the promised land of success. So they're desperate for results. Another quote, any codependent relationship is built upon a dysfunctional system of rewards. We enable narcissistic behavior because we get something from the leader. Sometimes the reward is small, but sometimes it can be big. It may only be that we are addicted to the adrenaline of crisis that comes with this style of leadership. Organizations tolerate narcissistic leadership behavior because they fear that no one else will be able to produce the same results. The larger the organization, the more difficult it is to disengage because there seems to be so much at stake. So if we don't have this leader, we could lose everything. We need this leader to keep us alive, to keep us growing, to give us results. That's what it boils down to. Organizations enable narcissistic leaders by developing social systems that reinforce their abuse. Narcissistic leaders surround themselves with other leaders who make them feel special. This inner circle experiences a vicarious thrill by being associated with the leader, so that now you've got another collective narcissistic group, an inner circle, and it feeds off the leader and the leader feeds off them. Because narcissistic leadership comes with perks and special treatment, the inner circle often gets rewarded along with the leader. The result is a codependent loop which blinds those who should be responsible for holding the narcissist accountable. So now that inner circle becomes a protective layer from the narcissist becoming accountable. Likewise, whole groups of people and systems can constellate around a narcissistic leader. This is more prone to happen in seasons when these groups feel particularly threatened. Fear. Groups at times plug into the energy, the power, the grandiosity, the dogmatic certainty of narcissistic leaders. So you can go from a small group of people constellating around a narcissist and getting fed to a large group, especially in times of fear. So how do we change? I hope you see that. You're not going to change narcissistic leaders unless they deal with their wounded inner child, the shame issue. You're not going to have groups stop welcoming narcissistic leaders unless they deal with their own personal shame, because they're still looking for a false solution to their shame that they think the narcissistic leader is going to provide. So everybody's got to deal with shame is the bottom line. But secondly, we can get help by learning to detect the warning signs of a narcissistic leader, of a wolf in sheep's clothing. And that's what I'm going to talk about next week. But let me just end by saying this was actually the real original purpose behind the children's story, The Little Red Riding Hood. So the Little Red Riding Hood story was to help children realize that not everybody that looks nice, that looks like grandma, is actually sweet and kind. They might be out there dressed up like grandma in order to kill you. And so the story that we have was adapted by the Grimm brothers, but the original story was by Charles Perrault in 1697. And it was really to help in that culture, young girls being taken advantage of by men sexually, and they would kind of groom them, they would lure them into relationships by being sweet, by being kind, and then take advantage of them sexually. And so this story was told in order to kind of have a moral, which was to girls, you need to be very careful when older men approach you, and make sure that you check out whether or not they're safe, whether or not they truly are there to help you, or whether they're just wanting to groom you so that they can use you and abuse you. And so that was really the original point of this story. And that's what we all need. And so next week I'm going to really dig into helping us understand the characteristic of narcissistic leaders. So for today, I hope that just helps you again understand this whole topic of why people welcome narcissists as leaders. But I hope it helps you understand even more that I don't want people to walk around and go, you're a narcissist, and brand everybody and just have a stigma. I want people to realize this is all about a wounded person. And we can help wounded people. If they're in a safe place and willing to start to look at the wounds, then people can change and heal. And that's what I'm about. That's what I hope you begin to understand. And if you're a person that goes, yeah, I see narcissistic tendencies in myself. I see that at times I can be very narcissistic, especially when I'm angry or when I'm stressed out. We can help you begin to heal that inner child that begins to change that. Because it's when you're triggered, you can do so much damage to those you love. You can be wonderful 90% of the time, 95% of the time, but in those trigger times, that's when you do all the damage. And so that's what our courses are about, is helping people begin to understand and get to this deep stuff. So again, hopefully this is helpful for you. It's the end of another Friday night. Have a great weekend. We'll see you next week.